The weather's closing in on us here. It's been snowing a little bit. It's been cold. You know, it's that end of season push. And everybody's doing a really good job.
The Yukon is no stranger to legends, but there's one place even the toughest miners whisper about with fear: the Widow's Cut, a collapsed shaft buried under frozen permafrost, known as a graveyard for men and machines alike. For over a century, it has been left untouched, its dark reputation sealing it off from anyone bold enough to try. Old-timers say it's cursed, a death trap where gold lures you in, only to bury you alive. But Parker Schnabel isn't one to walk away from impossible odds. While others see danger, he sees opportunity, and he's about to risk everything on it. Armed with cutting-edge technology, Parker believes he's found something no prospector has ever uncovered: a hidden shaft leading straight into the heart of the Widow's Cut. If he's right, the treasure waiting below could be worth tens of millions. Yet this isn't just about gold. Strange markings, lost journals, and whispers of sabotage suggest the Widow's Cut guards something far more mysterious. And as Parker descends into the frozen darkness, he realizes the greatest danger may not be the mine itself, but the secrets buried within it. This is the story of Parker Schnabel's most dangerous gamble, a journey into a mine that has swallowed men whole, where history and mystery collide in the frozen veins of the Yukon. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to see isn't just another gold rush story. It's a tale of curses, rivals, and secrets that could rewrite Klondike history. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The first swing of Parker's excavator cut into ground that hadn't been touched in nearly a century. Each scoop brought up twisted roots, splintered timbers, and stone blackened with age, fragments of a story long buried. The men who had died here had left behind no gold, no glory, only silence and unanswered questions. And now Parker was about to disturb it all. The deeper he dug, the more the land seemed to resist him. Water seeped from hidden veins in the permafrost, turning the dirt into a heavy, sucking mire. Old timbers cracked like bones as the bucket chewed through them. Every sound carried weight: the groan of the earth, the snap of wood, the hiss of frozen ground breaking apart. To his crew, it felt less like mining and more like trespassing. Then came the first discovery. Buried under a collapsed wall of shale, Parker's team uncovered a rusted pickaxe, its handle half rotted away. The iron head still bore the marks of desperate use, as if the last man who held it had fought against the collapsing mine until his final breath. Parker stood over it silently, the weight of the past pressing down on him. This was no longer just a dig. It was an excavation of lives cut short. But Parker couldn't stop. If the old-timers had been chasing this vein when the Widow's Cut claimed them, then somewhere beneath this ruin lay the pay dirt they never reached. Each bucketful of gravel was a gamble. Would it hold the gold they died for, or would the earth swallow more men before it gave up its treasure? As night fell and shadows pooled around the pit, Parker's determination burned brighter. He wasn't just fighting for gold anymore. He was fighting to finish the story those lost miners never could. The Widow's Cut had already tested Parker's resolve, but fate seemed determined to push him deeper into its secrets. One afternoon, as the excavator's bucket clawed away at a wall of frozen earth, the teeth struck something solid. Not stone, not wood, but the corner of an old metal chest, buried and forgotten beneath a century of silt. The crew gathered as Parker pried it open with a crowbar. Inside lay a journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle, its pages yellowed and spotted with mold. It had survived the collapse, sealed away like a message from the dead. Parker lifted it carefully, brushing away the dirt. Every man nearby fell silent. In the Yukon, relics like this weren't just artifacts. They were whispers from the past, voices of men who had gambled everything for gold and often lost. That night, under the dim glow of the camplights, Parker opened the journal. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the words bled desperation. It belonged to a prospector named Elias Turner, one of the men rumored to have perished when the Widow's Cut gave way. Page after page described his crew's struggle. Bitter cold, collapsing timbers, hunger gnawing at their strength. But scattered between the misery were strange notations, arrows, measurements, and coded sketches. One passage caught Parker's eye. The widow will take the greedy, but she hides her true heart from those who fear. The second shaft runs beneath the north wall, marked by 3 stones, a man's grave or a miner's salvation. The words sent a chill through Parker. Could it be true? A hidden shaft? A secret passage that the others had missed in their rush for gold? His pulse quickened as he traced the faint sketch drawn beside the note. 3 stones stacked in a triangle, pointing toward an unmarked cut of earth. For Parker, this wasn't just history. It was a map, a century-old clue, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone bold enough to follow it. His crew voiced their doubts. The Widow's Cut had taken men before. It could do the same again. But Parker's determination hardened. He hadn't come this far to back down. Clutching the journal, Parker knew the real treasure wasn't in the pit he'd been digging. It lay somewhere beyond, where the prospector's secret shaft had slept undisturbed for over 100 years. And if the notes were right, Parker was standing on the edge of a discovery that could rewrite Klondike history. The Widow's Cut had always been a dangerous gamble, but now Parker faced a threat that ran deeper than collapsing walls or frozen ground. Word of his discovery, the journal, the hidden shaft, the promise of untouched gold, had slipped into the wrong ears. In the Yukon, secrets never stayed buried for long. His rival was no stranger to failure. For years, Cole Maddox had chased fortune across the Klondike and found only ruin. Crews deserted him, claims ran dry, and his name became a warning whispered among miners, a man blinded by greed, willing to burn everything around him for one last shot. When Maddox learned Parker was chasing the Widow's Cut, his pride flared into obsession. He told anyone who would listen that the mine was his by right, that the gold buried there belonged to him, not some upstart with television cameras and modern machinery. But Parker knew better. Maddox wasn't a man of patience or precision. He was reckless, and reckless men were dangerous. The journal's clues gave Parker a path forward, but the presence of Maddox meant every move had to be calculated. One mistake, and the rival could swoop in, claim the shaft, and destroy everything Parker had fought for. That night in camp, Parker studied Elias Turner's cryptic notes again. The passage about 3 stones gnawed at him. He needed someone who could read the land with a prospector's eye, someone who understood how the old-timers left their marks. Freddie Dodge's name came to mind, the gold guru who could see pay dirt where others saw nothing. If Maddox was bringing pride and fury to the fight, Parker would counter with strategy and knowledge. Still, tension lingered like smoke. The Yukon had always been a land of rivals, where one man's strike meant another's envy. As Parker's crew prepped the machines, they glanced over their shoulders, watching the tree line. They all knew Maddox was out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Widow's Cut wasn't just cursed ground anymore. It was a battleground, and Parker Schnabel was about to find out whether history rewarded the bold or devoured them both. When the Widow's Cut whispered its warnings, most men turned away. But Parker knew he couldn't face the cursed ground alone. He needed someone who understood the Yukon, beyond maps and machines. A man who had walked its frozen veins long before GPS or satellite scans. That man was Silas McGraw. Grey-bearded, weather-beaten, and carved from the land itself, Silas had lived in the Klondike his whole life. Locals spoke of him like a relic, a prospector who had seen more gold and more graves than he cared to count. He carried the weight of memory in his eyes, the kind that came from burying friends lost to greed, flood, and frost. When Parker approached him with Elias Turner's journal, Silas listened in silence, his gnarled fingers tracing the faded ink. Finally, he closed the book with a heavy sigh. "Son," he rasped, his voice rough as gravel, "the widow don't give her gold easy. That cut ain't just a hole in the earth. It's alive, shifts when it pleases. Water runs under her, soft as a whisper, hard as a hammer when she floods. Men think they're digging dirt, but the ground's digging graves." The warning hung in the air like smoke. Parker felt his crew shift uneasily behind him. Silas wasn't a man of superstition, and that made his words hit harder. But Parker's resolve was steel. He leaned forward, his tone quiet but unshakable. "I don't want to rob graves, Silas. I want to finish what those men started. You know this land better than anyone. Help me find that shaft, and maybe their story won't end in silence." For a long moment, Silas said nothing. Then he looked back toward the black scar of the Widow's Cut, his expression caught between fear and respect. "You're either the bravest fool I ever met, or the last one she'll swallow." By dawn, Silas had joined Parker's camp. His presence brought both comfort and dread. The men whispered that if anyone could lead them through the widow's shifting veins, it was him. Yet his every glance at the cursed mine reminded them all that they were walking into a place where history itself had teeth. The expedition had a guide now, but with him came the heavy shadow of the widow's wrath. The Widow's Cut had always been a riddle carved in stone, but Parker wasn't about to solve it with picks and shovels like the men who had perished before him. He brought the future into a battlefield haunted by the past. Drones buzzed overhead like watchful hawks, their cameras mapping every contour of the scarred landscape. Then came the Lidar, a weapon no old-timer could have even imagined. Invisible beams of light pierced through ice and earth, stripping away centuries of silence, layer by layer. The crew gathered around the glowing screen in the command tent as Parker studied the unfolding image. At first, it was nothing but jagged ridges and fractured rock, the ghost of the collapse. But then, like a secret clawing its way out of the dark, the shape appeared, perfectly straight, cutting clean through the chaos, a shaft, man-made, hidden all this time beneath permafrost and rubble. 40 meters, Parker muttered, his voice low, almost reverent. The data showed a vertical plunge into darkness, untouched for over 100 years. Elias Turner's journal hadn't lied. The 3 stones, the cryptic notes, they had been pointing to this all along. But revelation quickly gave way to dread. Silas McGraw, standing just behind Parker, squinted at the screen and shook his head. "That hole ain't dead," he warned. "Ice shifts, water eats at the walls. You put weight on it, she'll bite back. That shaft's been waiting a century, boy, and she don't like to be disturbed." The crew fell silent. 40 meters wasn't just a measurement. It was a descent into the unknown, into a place where light might never have touched since the collapse. To some, it was a beacon of hope. To others, a grave already dug. Parker's jaw tightened. He had risked too much to turn away now. If this shaft led to the heart of the Widow's Cut, it might also lead to the gold that Elias Turner's men had died chasing. The treasure no one had ever touched. For the first time, the widow had revealed her secret path. The question was no longer whether Parker could find it, but whether he could survive the descent. The shaft yawned open like the throat of a beast, swallowing light and sound alike. Parker stood at the rim, his hard hat beam cutting into the blackness before giving the nod. The steel cage creaked and shuddered as the winch lowered them down, each meter pulling them deeper into the widow's jaws. Above, the permafrost groaned. Chunks of ice flaked loose and rattled down the shaft, clanging against steel. Every sound was magnified, echoing off stone walls until it was impossible to tell where danger truly lurked. The men said little, their breaths heavy inside their masks, their eyes darting upward with every groan of shifting earth. At 20 meters, the walls grew strange. What should have been jagged fractures from the collapse smoothed into clean, deliberate lines. The excavator's lights revealed grooves cut into the stone, almost like chisels had shaped them long ago. Parker pressed a gloved hand against the wall. The marks weren't the work of modern mining. They were older, intentional. Silas McGraw's voice broke the silence, low and uneasy. "This weren't just a mine," he muttered. "Somebody carved this place with a reason." Further down, strange markings began to appear, faint etchings worn by time, but still visible under the beams. Circles, crosses, and symbols no one in the crew recognized. The men exchanged uneasy glances. To some, it looked like a prospector's map. To others, like warnings left by those who had vanished. By the time they reached 40 meters, the cage groaned against the winch's strain. The shaft opened into a narrow chamber, its ceiling dripping with icy water. The air was heavy, stale, as if trapped for a century. Parker stepped out first, boots crunching on frozen gravel. His flashlight swept across the walls, and there it was again. More markings, carved deeper this time, intersecting lines, forming what looked less like chance graffiti and more like design. A pattern. "Whatever this is," Parker whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "They built it for something bigger than gold." The silence pressed in on them, thick and suffocating. Every creak of metal, every drip of water sounded like a warning. This was no ordinary mine. The Widow's Cut was revealing itself not as a collapsed dig site, but as a construction with purpose. The question clawed at every mind in the chamber. What purpose? The Widow's Cut had never been a place for victory songs, only whispers of tragedy. Yet, for one fleeting moment, Parker felt the thrill of triumph. His pick scraped against quartz, shot through with veins of gold, gleaming faintly under the beams of their lamps. The chamber fell silent. Every man knew what it meant. Proof that Elias Turner's journal had been right. Proof that this cursed shaft still held what men had died for. But before celebration could take root, the earth growled. A metallic screech tore through the chamber as equipment failed, cables snapping, lights flickering. The winch above groaned like it was being pulled apart. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down the shaft that should have been empty. Cole Maddox, the rival, emerged from the shadows, face streaked with dirt, eyes burning with a fevered hunger. He had followed Parker's crew in silence, waiting for the moment of discovery before making his move. In his hand gleamed a crowbar, and the wrecked generator behind him made his intent clear. Sabotage. You think the widow's yours, boy? Maddox spat, voice echoing off the stone. This mine belongs to the men who bled for it, and I'll be damned before I let you steal her heart. The standoff was brutal, made more dangerous by the ground itself. As Parker and Maddox grappled, a thunderous crack split the air. Permafrost shattered overhead, sending cascades of ice crashing into the chamber. Then came the rush. Water, black and freezing, pouring in from ruptured veins in the rock. The tunnel became chaos. Silas shouted warnings as men scrambled for ropes, their lights flickering against the rising torrent. Maddox lunged for Parker again, but the flood struck like a hammer, sweeping debris between them. Parker clung to a steel beam, water surging at his chest, lungs burning as the shaft roared around him. For a moment, he thought this was how the widow would claim him. Another body for her frozen tomb. But with sheer grit, he hauled himself upward, clawing onto the lift cage as it rattled and screeched against the weight of water below. Behind him, the chamber disappeared into darkness, swallowed whole. Half the tunnel was gone, erased in seconds. The widow had taken her due, and though Parker had escaped with his life, the gold and Maddox were lost beneath the flood. The flood had nearly ended everything, but Parker wasn't finished. Guided by Silas and driven by Elias Turner's journal, he pressed deeper into the widow's cut, carving a path through mud, broken timbers, and stone that seemed determined to resist him. Each step carried the weight of history and the risk of joining it. Then, at the lowest point, the shaft opened into a cavern unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Their lamps flickered across walls that shimmered faintly, veins of gold running like rivers through the rock. The chamber glowed as though it breathed, as though the earth itself had a beating heart, made of treasure. Gasps broke from the men, rough voices trembling with disbelief. This was no mere pay streak. This was a fortune, tens of millions, buried in a tomb of stone. But gold wasn't all the chamber held. Silas's lights swept across the far wall and froze. Carvings, worn yet unmistakable, marked the stone. Intricate spirals, jagged symbols, and the outlines of weapons etched by hands long gone. Rusted blades and tools, half buried in silt, glinted faintly in the glow. These weren't the relics of Klondike prospectors. They were older, stranger, and their presence turned the chamber from a miner's dream into something far more unsettling. "This ain't right," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible. "This place, it wasn't built for digging. It was sealed, protected." Parker stepped closer, his breath clouding in the icy air. He brushed dust from a stone slab at the chamber's heart, revealing carvings that looked less like symbols and more like warnings. The realization settled heavy in his gut. This chamber wasn't simply a mine. It was a vault. Someone had meant for it to remain untouched, buried beneath ice and earth, guarded by time itself. The crew shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the gold and the carvings. For men who had bled and broken themselves for scraps, the sight of such fortune was intoxicating. But beneath that hunger was fear. Fear that the widow's curse wasn't just a legend, but a promise carved into the very stone around them. Parker stood at the center, caught between awe and dread. He had found what the journal promised, but the question pressed against his chest like a weight. Had he uncovered a treasure or disturbed something that was never meant to see the light of day? The chamber's silence didn't last. Cole Maddox had followed them once more, his face gaunt, eyes feverish with greed. The sight of the gold-veined walls drove him beyond reason. While Parker studied the carvings with unease, Maddox lunged for the rock face with his pick, hacking wildly at the treasure. His laughter rang through the cavern, manic and hollow. "Worth every grave," he shouted, veins bulging in his neck. "This gold is mine." But every strike echoed like a death knell. The walls groaned, timbers above splintered, and the widow stirred in fury. Silas roared a warning, but Maddox didn't hear, or refused to. One final swing, and the chamber answered with violence. The ceiling gave way. A thunderous crack split the earth as tons of stone and ice cascaded downward. Maddox vanished in an instant, his screams drowned in the roar of the collapse. The rival who had hunted fortune his whole life was claimed by the very ground he thought he could conquer. Parker and Silas barely escaped. The tunnel shook like a living beast, swallowing passageways as they ran. Water burst from fissures, chasing them in a black torrent. Parker stumbled, clutching something in his hands. Not gold, but a single artifact he had snatched in the chaos. A carved relic, smooth with age, marked with symbols no miner could read. They emerged gasping into the pale Yukon light as the widow's cut collapsed behind them in a shudder of earth and ice. The mine sealed itself once more, entombing Maddox, the gold, and the secrets of the chamber forever. Only then did Parker study the relic. The carvings weren't maps to treasure. They were warnings. The chamber hadn't been a mine at all. It was a burial site, a vault for something the old world had chosen to hide. The gold had been its bait, its guardian. The curse wasn't greed, it was truth. Silas's weathered face tightened as he looked at Parker. "You see now," he said. "The widow don't guard gold. She guards secrets no man was meant to touch." The relic gleamed faintly in Parker's hand, heavier than any gold he'd ever pulled from the ground. The Klondike's greatest treasure had been found and lost in a single breath. But the secret buried beneath the widow's cut would haunt Parker forever. Because some discoveries aren't meant to make men rich. They're meant to keep the past buried. The widow's cut gave Parker Schnabel more than he ever bargained for. What began as a miner's gamble ended in a confrontation with history itself. A lost chamber glittering with gold, a rival consumed by greed, and a relic whispering secrets too dark to ignore. For all the riches buried beneath the Klondike, Parker escaped with only a fragment. Yet that fragment may prove to be the most valuable find of his career, not for its weight in gold, but for the questions it forces us to ask. Who carved those markings into the chamber walls? Were they prospectors from a forgotten rush, or a people long before them, sealing away something never meant to be touched? Was the widow's cut truly cursed, or was the curse a warning, designed to keep greedy hands away from a truth buried deep beneath the ice? And if this relic was only a fragment, what else lies hidden in the veins of the Yukon, sealed away under centuries of stone and silence? Parker Schnabel may have escaped with his life, but the legend of the widow's cut is far from over, because sometimes treasure isn't the end of the story. It's only the beginning.